Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Are We on the Same Page? I'm your host, Dave Thomas Rocker, and today I'm going to talk about an important sub branch of moral philosophy or ethical philosophy, if you like, known as utilitarianism. And this little diagram kind of gives you an idea what it's about. I guess most utilitarians would say that the good of the many outweighs the good of the one. So, if you should make a sacrifice that's going to help more people, then it might hurt you, but help five other people, then you should do it. And a lot of people don't agree with this. I think in general I do actually. But anyway, let's just get started with it. So let's first define utilitarianism. This is kind of a vague definition. Just as it's a theory of morality that advocates actions that foster happiness or pleasure and oppose actions that cause unhappiness or harm. That's kind of what it is in a nutshell. You want to try to make as many people happy as possible. And, you can even make a mathematical definition of that. The only problem with that is nobody's figured out how to measure happiness or utility. But the first person, I think the first philosopher who came up, who coined the name utilitarianism and came up with the definition was John Stuart Mill in 1821. I believe he was a British philosopher, and he came up with what's called the principle of utility, or also known as the greatest happiness principle. So I'll just elaborate on it a little bit. It's an action. He said an action is right to the extent that it increases the total happiness of affected parties, and it's wrong if it decreases the total happiness of affected parties. Um, so there's different ways you can measure. I mean, or you talk about the measure of happiness. You can say advantage, benefit, good, or pleasure. And I think it's a nice idea. I mean, the thing is, I'm a mathematician, so it makes sense to me. It makes a lot more sense than the Bible. I mean, maybe I shouldn't get into religion here, but we shouldn't be doing good things just because some source of authority tells us what's right and what's wrong. We should figure that out for ourselves. That's the main thing I like about utilitarianism. And utilitarianism, it seems like at least it attempts to make a mathematical basis for deciding what's good and what's bad. And I like that. I like that aspect of utilitarianism. And there's actually two different kinds of utilitarianism. There's act utilitarianism and rule utilitarianism. So I'm more of a fan of act utilitarianism. This is more in line with I think Mill's definition. So act utilitarian focuses on consequences of individual actions and assesses them based on their expected utility or benefit. So we don't really know before we make an action. We don't know what the outcome is going to be, but again, you can apply probability theory here. You can say what will probably happen if you do something, and if the chances are it'll help people, including you, then you should do it. And if the chances are it'll hurt people, you can do weighted averages, then you shouldn't do it. And that kind of makes sense to me. Evaluates actions separately, considering each one in terms of its effect or happiness or pleasure. Act utilitarian means act may be considered morally right even if it violates traditional notions of justice or individual right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with there was a very famous 18th century novel called Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, and the story begins with the main character, forget his name, Jean Valjean. He gets arrested. He gets sentenced for 10 years for stealing a loaf of bread, and he's hungry. I mean, what are you going to do? Are you going to prevent starving people from stealing in order to survive just because it's morally wrong to steal because it says in the Bible, thou shalt not steal? I don't think so. If it's a matter of life and death, you're helping yourself. Otherwise, you're going to die in the streets. I'd rather steal a loaf of bread if it was a matter of life and death. I mean, I guess that's a pretty extreme example. Another example I can think of, most people think lying is wrong. Most of my life, I've really prided myself on being honest. But you guys have probably heard, what would you have done if you were if you were hiding people, from the Gestapo during the Holocaust? What are you going to do if the Gestapo knocks on your door? Are you going to tell them the truth? Oh yeah, I'm hiding concentration camp victims. No, that's a case where it'd be wrong to lie. So there's always circumstances you have to look at, and that's why we have a judicial system. So I'm all for act utilitarianism. Rule utilitarianism is more rule oriented. You're talking about rules of society. Yeah, you can come up with a set of rules that's going to make in general society happier, but there's always exceptions to rules. So I don't like rule utilitarianism. I'm not going to even read this part because I've already explained why I'm more of a fan of act utilitarianism than rule utilitarianism. And there's also something called Kantianism. There was a very famous, I think he preceded Jean-Toulouse Mill. There was another famous philosopher named Immanuel Kant. He was another moral philosopher. And, he came up with his own ideas about how people should act. And he came up with something called the categorical imperative, which basically says everybody should act in such a way that if everybody did it, the world would be a better place. I mean, that's sort of like utilitarianism. That kind of gives you a reason why we shouldn't steal, right? If everybody was stealing, then we wouldn't be able to protect anything, any property. The whole idea of property would go out the window, and it would be chaotic because there'd be no guarantee that you could hold on to anything, including your next meal. So, that kind of explains why people shouldn't steal, and obviously people shouldn't kill because if everybody killed, the society would die, everybody would die. So it's pretty obvious. If you use that categorical imperative, but I mean, I guess one objection to utilitarianism. I mean, if you carry it too far, then you could say, well, the good of the many outweighs the good of the few or the good of the one. And actually, I've seen some very interesting exercises in this. Kind of thought experiments. And I remember I took a philosophy class years ago, and I was given this as an exercise. Suppose that you're standing on a bridge overlooking a street. So there's a street running under your bridge. You're in a city, and there's a trolley or a cable car that loses control, and it starts running down the street. Nobody can stop it. It's a runaway cable car, and there's five people at the intersection right below you, and they're going to get killed because they can't move out of the way fast enough. This cable car is going to come and kill five people. But there happens to be a fat man on the bridge, and you could save their lives if you push the fat man off the bridge so that he'd block the cable car. The cable car would hit the fat man instead of the five people at the intersection. So the question is, should you push the fat man off the bridge? And I think if you were a strict utilitarian, you would say yes, because it's the only way you can save five people, sacrifice one for the greater good of five. I think most people wouldn't do this. I mean, that could be considered murder. This is an innocent fat man on the bridge just minding his own business. Are you going to push him off just because he'd saved five people's lives? I don't think you have the right to do that. And according to Kantianism, you don't because there's a categorical imperative. You shouldn't murder, right? And the reason is because if everybody murdered, the world would be a worse place. So people have, and basically this gets to like human rights. Everybody has a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So nobody has a right to take away anybody's right to live. You shouldn't kill anybody, even in extreme circumstances like this. And actually, I mean, if you think this is just a theoretical example, there was actually a real life example kind of like this in the early 20th century. The maybe you've heard of this before, but there was a shipwreck. I think around 1912 or somewhere around then. I don't know the exact year, but there was a shipwreck where five people got stranded on a desert island with no food, and they couldn't get back home, and they were there for almost a month, and they were starving for almost a month on this island. They didn't have anything to eat, and finally, what they decided, they were all going to die of starvation if they stayed on this island because there was nothing for them to eat. So what they finally decided was that they needed to sacrifice one of these people on the island. So they drew straws to determine who should get eaten, you know, and save the lives of the remaining four. And I guess the cabin boy was unlucky enough to be the one chosen. So they killed the cabin boy, and then they ate him. And the four remaining, shipwrecked people survived. And then I think a few days later, they got rescued. But then, there was a whole issue, whether these other four castaways had committed murder. And they went to trial, and I think they were found guilty, actually. And I don't know what their sentence was. I don't know if they were sentenced to life imprisonment or given the death penalty. I don't know the outcome, but they were found guilty. And this is an exercise that I think is usually given to law students, and I actually think that they did the right thing. I mean, if it's a matter of life and death, and they agreed to it. I mean, they grasped at straws. They all agreed that they had to sacrifice one of these guys for the greater good of the other four. So I don't think there was a problem with that. The cabin boy had agreed to do this, and it's unfortunate that he had to die in the process, but it was an agreement. It was a matter of life and death among the other ones, and I think it's better than if they had all died of starvation. Um, and it's interesting because there is some overlap between Kantianism and utilitarianism, and the overlap, and both try to define what's moral based on kind of principles, not rules. Just general kind of logical principles or reasonable principles, and they're not based on religion. They're not based on the Bible or any other religious source or authoritarian source telling us what's right and what's wrong. See, I'm totally against that. I really don't like the Bible, and a big thing I don't like about the Bible is, Ten Commandments. I mean, you know, I think there's exceptions to every rule. I don't even like most of the Ten Commandments. The first five are all just about, making sure that you obey the religion. And, why do we have to do that? Just because it's in the Bible? And like, even the honoring of thy father and thy mother. What if your father and mother are insane? What if they try to kill you? Are you still supposed to honor them? There are bad parents in this world. Are we supposed to honor every parent in this world, no matter how bad they are, no matter how life threatening they are? I don't think so. I mean, I guess the last five are okay. Thou shalt not murder. I agree with that. Thou shalt not commit adultery. I'm a little wavering on that. I don't think that one's that serious. There's a lot of infidelity in our society. Thou shalt not steal. Yeah, except for extreme circumstances like les miserables. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Yeah, of course not. You shouldn't deceive anybody. That's wrong. Thou shalt not covet. That's a weird one. Thou shalt not covet anything that's thy neighbor. That just means you shouldn't want something that's not yours. I mean, how can you tell people what to want and what not to want? I guess it's a motive for theft. But, I mean, those are the only four I kind of agree with. But, I mean, the whole idea of having commandments is wrong, in my opinion. We should discover moral principles, and I like principle. I like the word principle better than rule or law. I mean, yeah, we need laws in our society just to make it run, and we should have a justice system, but, we should have a jury like we do today, and we should listen to all the evidence. And, I don't think there's any, I mean, I remember an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. It was called Justice, actually. And, maybe before I get off, I'll just sort of summarize the plot. So they go to this planet where it's kind of a primitive planet, but it's like a utopia. It's kind of like at the end of the Time Machine, where they go to the year 800,000, whatever, and there's this kind of utopia where everybody's just carefree and enjoying life. And it's also a sexual utopia. I mean, there's no. I guess you can have sex with whoever you want, and they all enjoy it. But the problem with this planet is that every if you violate any law, is punishable by death, no matter how benign a law it is, like even keeping off the grass. And this one, Wesley, who's a member of the Enterprise crew, he's visiting. He doesn't know their laws, and they're playing catch, and he accidentally runs into I guess a greenhouse where they're growing new plants, and he destroys the plants, and they're gonna kill him because of that, because of their stupid law. And the whole episode, they just have they have to convince the people on the planet that Wesley didn't do anything wrong and he doesn't deserve to die. And they finally able to do that. But I remember the last thing Jean-Luc Picard said in that show, which I agree with. He said there can be no justice as long as laws are absolute. Think about that. There's exceptions to every rule. And, a proper justice system needs a jury and it needs trials and you have to hear all the evidence. And anyway, that's all I have to say about utilitarianism. And you can comment. You might not agree with everything I said in this video. I don't expect you to agree with everything. I have all my own opinions on all these things. But anyway, thank you for watching and keep thinking. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.